So, why is this channel anonymous? I mean, I own a webcam, it would be easy enough for me to turn it on. And all of the evidence that I've seen seems to indicate that having a camera on can be a massive boon for your channel. So much of communication is nonverbal, and just being able to be seen goes such a long way with people being able to empathize with you and understand what you're saying and how you're saying it. And also with like building a degree of trust with not just the viewer but even for like sponsors and opportunities like that. So really it seems like it would be a no-brainer. Like surely there must be some sort of reason. Is it insecurity? Is it just not liking being on camera? You know, what would it be? Honestly, my answer I feel is even more simple than that. Just growing up, I always felt that a degree of anonymity was really cool. Growing up in the early 2000s, my family was decently engaged with WWE, watching multiple times a week and also the pay-per-views. And honestly, I was more engaged than I really should have been, considering just how raunchy that era of the WWE was. But I was never so engaged as the first time that I saw Rey Mysterio pop out of the crowd. That theme music and just everything about his presentation, the fact that, you know, he was much shorter than everybody else, but used that to his advantage to be very nimble and to jump around the stage. And I mean, I really had never seen anything like it. I was like, damn, this guy is a real true to life superhero. And it was super cool to me that not only was he in the ring with his mask, but if they were cutting a promo backstage, he was also in his mask. If he was doing an interview somewhere else, he was still in his mask. It's almost like Rey Mysterio and the mask are one, right? But there wasn't even just the one mask. Like he would have so many different masks and so many different like color variations and stuff. And I just thought that that was super, super tight. Sort of around that same time, I also really liked Daft Punk. You know, Discovery came out in 2001. Tremendous album. I still listen to Discovery. I love that album to pieces. And just Daft Punk, their presentation, you know, everything about their helmets or their masks, whatever you want to call them. I thought that was super cool too. As I was getting into dancing as a young adult, some of my favorite dancers and the people that I really looked to and respected were Duat Rat and Tora-san over in Japan. This era of like Nico Nico Doga dancers, my understanding, and I'm not from that region, but my understanding is that dancing was their hobby and it was something they were really passionate about, but it wasn't like their day job. And so many of the dancers from that era, they wanted to or needed to wear masks to be able to protect their identity and to protect their livelihood, to not get any sort of pushback, you know, whenever they had to return to the office during the week. But just that mental image of like a Super Sentai or a Lucha Libre like dancer wearing like a bunch of streetwear and, you know, cool hats, baggy pants and stuff like that, that really stuck with me. And I just think that style of presentation is also super cool. Returning back to music, my favorite rapper of all time is MF Doom, who is super famous for wearing his iconic Doom mask. He has this interview that he did with, I believe it was the Red Bull Academy, and I don't want to play the clip because it ends up running a little bit long, but basically he talks about the mask and how it's basically a statement from him. Growing up, he came from an era where you would listen to somebody rap, but you didn't know what they looked like until you ended up showing up to their show. And so the words that they said held all the power. But as he grew up a little bit and, you know, it entered more of a digital age where music videos were a little bit more prominent and that sort of thing, he noticed that it was quickly becoming a little bit more about what people looked like over what they sounded like, and he didn't really appreciate that. There was a time when I was streaming that to give somebody some degree of body language and some degree of like facial communication and that sort of thing, I gave VTubing a real shot. VTubing is not cheap. Buying a model, buying a rig, it's very, very expensive. So it was a real investment to give it a shot. And to me, it felt like a good opportunity to both, you know, keep a little bit of my anonymity while also giving people something that they could empathize with. But what I ran into was the same problem that Doom talked about, where it felt like some of the audience that showed up, they were there for the aesthetic that I had or for the character that they felt I was portraying or some sort of aesthetic appreciation without actually caring about what I was talking about at all. So all of that sort of taken together is why ultimately I prefer anonymity, even at the cost of like maybe financial or interpersonal gain. And it's important to note that this is like a pretty soft anonymity. Like when I have the means to and I'm able to go out to tournaments again, I plan to still enter as SMP Loops. And if you guys happen to sit next to me and talk to me and you're like, hey, are you that guy that runs that channel? I'll be like, yeah, and I'm happy to talk to you and have a conversation with you. So, you know, it's not like I'm in hiding. A lot of the people that I'm talking about aren't in hiding. Like, we know what Rey Mysterio looks like without his mask now. We knew who Doom was before he became MF Doom. So, you know, for me, it's not about hiding my identity so much as just like, in this space, this is just how I prefer to present. And next I want to talk about that tag SMP Loops and sort of where it comes from. So while Street Fighter 4 was my first fighting game, I think Persona 4 Arena, Vanilla, the first one, was the first fighting game that I really fell like head over heels in love with. And Naoto I just thought was so cool. She was like really mobile and could really play anywhere on the screen. If she needed to run away, she had these powerful traps and this powerful gun projectile that, you know, both of them were less conventional than just like having a straight up fireball you could throw at somebody. But they were also more fun to play around with. And she had really strong up close buttons and up close tools as well. And just the freedom of like being able to combo stray hits into traps that you had already set up to create like new interesting routes on the fly, I felt like was just incredibly rewarding and incredibly fun. Not to mention the fact that she has an alternate win condition, the ability to just instant kill somebody if she's been able to get enough, I believe they were called fate markers off of the opponent. Super, super dope character. And also, even before I knew that I was a non-binary person, like I was already drawn to androgynous characters, so that probably helped quite a bit too. Now, Naoto in Persona 4 Vanilla was the biggest exploiter of the SMP loop. Now, an SMP loop is not a persona-specific term, it is a fighting game term, but frankly, it's one that doesn't apply to very many situations anymore because we've ironed a lot of the kinks in design out, and it just doesn't come up very much anymore. But talk a little bit about what it is. Now, SMP stands for Same Move Proration, which is a fancy way of describing like an infinite protection system. Basically, the way that it works is if a game recognizes that you're doing a move or a particular string of moves over and over in a combo, it will rapidly decay the amount of hit stun that the opponent has on them to basically try to prevent any kind of simple infinites from occurring. Now, Persona 4 Arena also had this system in it. If you tried to combo somebody with the exact same move over and over again, the opponent would, after a couple of reps, be able to tech and just get out of the combo for free. But with one major caveat. You see, while Persona 4 Vanilla had a same move proration system, it only kept track of the first 10 distinct moves that you did in a combo. After that, it would stop counting it at all. So, importantly for this, each different variation of a move that you did counted as a new distinct move. So you could, for example, do crouching light into stand heavy, into crouch heavy, into your persona attack, into a heavy version of a special move, and then the light version of that special move, etc., right? It all counts as a different move. But once you've done 10 distinct moves, if that 11th move that you do is able to combo into itself, you've got yourself an infinite. Now, by the end of that game's life cycle, I feel like I had ways of getting into my SMP loop off of basically any starter that I had. I really drilled that into my hands and my system. I was unhinged, especially considering that that game had delay-based netcode, and I was playing on Wi-Fi a lot of the time. Truly just a menace to society, just the worst kind of person. But that wouldn't be enough for me to take on this name, and in fact, I didn't really take on this name until much, much later. As I was getting out of college, I was sort of going through a lot, and I tend to, when I'm in a very emotional place, I tend to focus on building a new skill just so that I can sort of get all of that energy out somewhere. And so at that time, I was learning a lot about like hip hop production and beat making. And, you know, a lot of my inspirations at that time, again, being a big Doom fan, was like Madlib. I also listened to a lot of Nujabes, who everybody gets introduced to through Samurai Champloo. And yeah, I also was just a big fan of Timbaland growing up. So like sample-based hip hop was very, very important to me, and it was my personal bread and butter. And so not only was SMP loops a fighting game term that really resonated with me and felt like part of my origin story, but also as somebody who was producing a lot of hip hop at the time, phonetically SMP loops kind of reads out like sample loops, which just sort of felt like a clever play on words that just kind of worked out for me. And in general, it just felt like a term of power that was appropriate for a bunch of the different environments I was in. Like, if I'm in fighting games, a loop is a very powerful thing. If I'm making music, a loop is a very powerful thing. If I'm playing trading card games, a loop is a very powerful thing. And the last thing I wanted to talk about in terms of identity was just being a non-binary person. Now, topics of trans identity are a little bit sensitive. To be completely honest, it's a little bit nerve-wracking for me to be talking about this. So I've kind of tucked it away at the end of this video. But this is stuff that was important for me to hear, so I feel like it's stuff that's important for me to say. So if you ask somebody who's not super immersed in this topic what they think gender is, they might tell you that gender is something that you're born with. But if you are meeting somebody new for the first time, these people who would say this, they don't ever like verify before referring to somebody, if you catch my drift, because it would just be incredibly inappropriate, incredibly violating, and just incredibly rude to ask to like see first. You understand what I'm saying? And so I think the first level of understanding gender is that it's something of a performance, right? You look at things like the way that their hair might be done, if they're wearing any kind of makeup, if they have any kind of facial hair, like the tone of their voice, these sorts of identifiers to try to determine how you should refer to somebody, especially if you're just meeting them for the first time. What's important to note, however, is that you're still making an assumption that can be wrong, because what ultimately trumps over all of that is an individual's personal preference and how they want to be referred to. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, your gender is about whatever makes you the most comfortable and whatever enables you to live your best life. If my buddy Matthew came up to me and he was like, hey, we've known each other for a little while, I noticed that you keep calling me Matthew, but, I actually prefer, most of my friends actually just call me Matt. It's just a lot shorter, it's a lot easier. My response wouldn't be, no. You were born Matthew. It says Matthew on your birth certificate. You're gonna live and you're gonna die a Matthew, okay? That's so obtuse. Like, there's just no reason to do that. It doesn't make any sense. In the same vein, if somebody comes up to me and they say, hey, I noticed that you referred to me as he or him earlier. I actually prefer to use they and them pronouns. I would really appreciate if you would respect that. Totally. Like, there's no reason to give somebody pushback like that. I think, if it's your first time interacting with a trans person, to be fair, it can be a little bit difficult to acclimate at first, just because you're not used to changing that part of a sentence for somebody else's comfort. And that is fair. But like 99% of trans people aren't going to give you a hard time so long as they can tell that you're putting in an earnest effort and you're not trying to be like obtuse and offensive. So the reason that I use they and them pronouns is because being referred to as he and him the entire time growing up always just kind of made me uncomfortable, and I didn't really understand why, and I didn't even know until I was much, much older that there was even an alternative. Being referred to as a man felt like it came with a whole set of expectations that I just didn't care about. Like, it wasn't that I didn't want to be them, it's just that I didn't care about them at all. My focus growing up was never on being a strong man, it was always on being a good person, straight up. And so a lot of the values that other people held around, how do you be a man, what makes a good man, what makes a weak man, I don't care about any of that at all. I really don't. At the same time, I think the reason why it took me so long to accept that I could use they and them pronouns was that I didn't have any drive to be androgynous in any kind of way. So the way that I kind of describe my presentation now is it's almost like a boulder that's rolled downhill. And what I mean by that is that like I've grown up with a particular type of wardrobe, I've liked a particular style of clothing. I've grown up, speaking a particular way. And now that I'm in this position that I'm in, I don't really feel like changing all that much. Like, just because I don't want the pressures of being a man on my shoulders all the time doesn't necessarily mean that I feel an initiative to be more feminine than I already am. Does that make sense? What was important for me to hear, and what I kind of wanted to get around to and say here, was that your trans identity, whatever it might be, or your identity period really, is about something that makes you comfortable, right? You don't owe it to anybody to be somebody different than you already are to make them feel more comfortable. It really is about you and what you're comfortable with. And I just want to note and acknowledge first that like my identity is like relatively unique. It puts me in a unique position. First, non-binary is actually an umbrella term that incorporates a lot of various different types of people. I myself am agender, meaning that I don't feel firmly like either a man or a woman. Some people are gender fluid in that they might want to present as a man one day, or they might want to present as a woman another day, at another time, another instance, what have you. Some people identify as like an entirely third type of gender. They might use neopronouns. There are all types of entirely valid identities that fall under this umbrella. But while I feel firmly that being non-binary is a valid trans experience, I still have to acknowledge that I would not be able to speak to a lot of trans issues or more traditional trans issues. So as an example, I can't really speak to body dysmorphia because it's just not something that I really have at all. I'm not really able to speak to the experience of like being out and about as a trans person because I'm in stealth mode like 90% of the time. If you don't know me, I just look like a dude, and if somebody refers to me as he, like at the Starbucks, like I'm not gonna sit there and correct them on it. So, in a lot of ways, I do have to acknowledge that like it's very important for me to be a trans ally, but I can't directly speak to a lot of trans issues in the same way that I guess a more traditionally trans person would be able to. So yeah, I mean, I generally try not to make videos talking about myself unless I feel like they're able to help another person, and I do feel like this topic fell under that category. Certainly this isn't going to be useful for everybody, but to the handful of people that this is going to be useful to, I feel like, hearing this really changed my life for the better, so I'm hopeful that it'll end up helping somebody else out there too. Anyways, please be nice to each other in the comments. Bigots beware. All right, I'm out. Peace.